Charles, you are the wind beneath my wings.
Oh, thank you, darling.
Thank you. I am not the technical one here.
I know.
I freely admit that. You know, we come up with these ideas and you make them happen. Like, how did this come about?
Believe it or not, it's all because of Anchor. Anchor has the tools. It lets me record, edit, and distribute right from the computer. Sometimes I do it from my phone. It's just as easy either way.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're on like dozens of platforms, though.
It's true. Anchor makes it easy to distribute our podcast on platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and dozens more. It's everything we need, and it's all in one place. And you'll love this part. It's all completely free.
Oh, thank God.
Right. I use Anchor for pretty much every aspect of getting our show out there and into the listeners' ears.
That's amazing.
It is. And if you, dear listeners, want to get into the podcasting game, you just need to download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started.
Maybe Anchor's the wind beneath my wings.
Hey!
Hello, Full Circle listeners. This is Martha.
And this is Charles.
Before we get to the episode, we want to take a moment to address the June 24th Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision stripped away the federal right to a safe and legal abortion for all Americans who can become pregnant.
Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all Americans. This decision could also lead to the loss of other rights.
To learn more about what you can do to help, go to podvoices.help. We encourage you to speak up and spread the word, and of course vote in November like our rights depend on it, because they do.
Thank you for listening. Now on to the show.
Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a special episode of Full Circle, the podcast, from Medway Pride Radio. I'm your host, Martha Madrigal.
And I'm your host, Charles Tyson Jr.
And we are thrilled to introduce you to our guest today. Robb Reichard has worked for over 30 years in support of the HIV-affected communities in Philadelphia. Since 2004, Robb has been the executive director of AIDS Fund. Charles and I have had the honor of working with Robb in displaying the AIDS Memorial Quilt, volunteering for the AIDS Walk in Philadelphia, as well as working with the best black tie gala in all of Philadelphia, Black Tie Gay Bingo. As our friends in the UK memorialized the 40th anniversary of the Terence Higgins Trust, we were asked to do a program looking back at HIV here in the United States. I think that has to also include a look forward, and Robb is the first name that came to both of our minds.
Yeah.
Robb Reichard, welcome to the Full Circle table, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. It's so good to see you.
It is.
Yeah, been a while.
It really has.
So thank you for taking time out of the day. I know this is the lead up to the AIDS Walk,
Yes.
right? October 16th, correct? Sunday?
Yes, Sunday, October 16th.
Beautiful. So I know that it's a busy time of year, but we, when we were asked to do this for our show on Medway Pride, you were the first person that just came to mind because you've been in the fight all of these years. I learned a little something I didn't know. Your work actually started when you worked at Pierce College.
Oh, yeah. Yes. In the late 80s, shortly after I graduated from college, my first career plan was to work in higher education. And I did admissions and financial aid work and student housing there, and started doing, and of course, at that point in the AIDS epidemic, you couldn't do HIV education without also addressing heterosexism, homophobia. To really, they were so intertwined at that point in the epidemic. And so I started doing that with students and in sociology classes at the college. And I expanded that to doing some work educating my peers who were doing work at other colleges, and, presenting how I was doing that work in at conferences. So, got involved very early on.
Those were very different times.
Yeah, they were.
You and I were adults then. Charles wasn't yet. Charles came of age in the mid 90s, but the mid 80s were terrifying.
You say adult.
Well,
I was
of age.
Yes, I was in high school in 1981 when the first reports of HIV came out, and or the gay cancer, and I was struggling with my own sexuality at that point.
Sure.
And layering that on top of it, it became kind of, as I said, you couldn't talk about one without the other in those days, and so very much became a part of who, my identity as a gay man is to, that HIV is part of that.
Right.
So.
Like it or not, yeah.
Yeah,
so,
there was no separating the two.
Right.
1994, you made it your full-time work.
Yeah. I went to work for Babashi, which is an acronym, although they don't use the acronym much anymore. It's Blacks Educating Blacks About Sexual Health Issues. It was one of the first organization in the country that targeted the African American community with HIV education, and really culturally appropriate education. I felt very honored to work there, in a variety of roles over 5 years. And it was a great learning experience for me, really boots on the ground, grassroots organization, in the early 90s, and really admire the work that they continue to do today.
Yeah, they do.
And they do still exist in Philadelphia today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What, so I guess 1995 was a turning point in terms of ART, right? In terms of the treatment. But
sure.
Was it slower to reach community level? I mean, how long?
Yes, and in some ways still, is slow to reach. There's far too many people who receive an AIDS diagnosis at the same time they're getting a diagnosis of having HIV. So they're already progressed and ill before they ever even access treatments.
Right.
And so I think we still have some work to do in this country to reach the most marginalized communities. And to really, we still face a lot of stigma about getting tested around HIV. I'd like to say the stigma is gone. It's not. We have a lot of work to do to end stigma. We can't end the epidemic if we don't do away with stigma.
Right. Yeah.
What was the focus of the work at that period of time? So when you were with Babashi, you were there about 5 years. What was the focus? What did what's the organization look like then?
Well, we were at that point in the epidemic in the early 90s, and really even into the mid 90s, we were really trying to help people to die with dignity.
Right.
To access whatever treatments were available, and medical care, educating the community about HIV, and kind of dispelling the many, many myths around HIV.
Yeah.
So testing was important, education was important, and then case management and really helping people to navigate the system so that they could live with HIV. But it was a time period where, we didn't have a lot of options or a lot of hope in the early 90s. And so, we'd encourage people to get tested, but once they got tested, there wasn't a lot we could do medically, so, it was a very, very difficult time. And, we, coworkers of mine, colleagues of mine, in addition, of course, to clients, but coworkers and colleagues passed away during those years. And, it was a hard time that, continues to, I think, certainly affect my work. I'll never forget those days.
Yeah. I don't know anybody who, was there or lost friends, and so many friends, who doesn't remember.
Oh yeah.
You pulled me up short one time. We have a mutual friend that we lost to cancer not that long ago. Our friend Tony, and you and I were talking about that. And when he got diagnosed just a few years ago, and he kind of knew this was terminal. He didn't have a long time. And you said, this is not the first time he's had to stare down death. Like, I guess I had forgotten that. You know what I mean? Like, I had not looked at it that way, and you were just so clear with that. Like, yeah, this time has really been a gift. And it just made me really think about how many folks were right there. How many stories there are of folks who like sold things and ran up credit cards and said, that I'm not going to be here.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And, and of course everybody, handles that when they get that news differently. I often think about a friend of mine who, I spent a lot of time with camping, back in the late 80s, early 90s. He was a part of a group that I was friends with. And we suddenly, and he and his husband had the best Christmas parties. And part of their tradition was a white elephant or whatever that, I forget what they call that, with the gift trading thing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And everybody tried to find the tackiest gift that would be the most popular gift also. I mean, that was everybody's challenge, was to find the gift that was the most tacky, but also the one that everybody would want.
Like purple velvet Jesus or something.
Exactly. And wonderful parties. And, one year we didn't get invited, and they just, we didn't hear anything from him or his husband. And I remember driving down the street one day in Center City, back when I was this was the late 80s, early 90s, and seeing him standing on a street corner and recognizing him, but barely recognizing him, because in the 2 years that I hadn't seen him, he had aged about 20 years. He had lost so much weight, was so again, he had aged 30 years in a matter of 2 years. And when he passed away and we reconnected with his husband told us that Tom wanted us to remember him as he had lived his life up to the point where he got sick. That's how he wanted us to remember him.
Yeah.
And he didn't want us to see him sick.
Right.
And, I understand that. I get that. But it also leaves a hole. We didn't get to really, enjoy with him or try to help him to enjoy those last couple of years, surrounded by friends. So that was, again, everybody handles things differently when they're approaching death. And certainly, our friend Tony handled things, but he had faced down death before. In the early 90s and survived. And had a gift of those years of borrowed time.
He really did. And it made me see not just his life, but, a lot of things in perspective that I don't carry all the time Do you know what I mean? Like I hadn't known him as long, and I knew that part of his story, but I had just forgotten it. Like I hadn't, and it was like, yeah, he really has. Yeah, he has lived, I think, more richly, even though he'd been through a whole bunch of things and a breakup and all kinds of stuff. He was still pretty present. And yeah. Yeah. And I remember that moment. Being in the presence of the quilt, always centers me and makes me quiet. And I've had the honor of reading the names in different venues.
Yeah,
and
we both have, yeah.
I don't think I've ever done it without my voice shaking. I can't, I just can't. But it's such an important thing that happens in conjunction with.
I think it's critical that we remember those we've lost and honor them. And just, with all of the advances that we've made, and we certainly have made a lot of advances, we would not have made those advances without the contributions of those people.
Absolutely.
And those lives. And so, it's always a matter of balancing and remembering to honor, the past and then, but also being present in today. And, we're not, we have to be, thankful for the advances that have been made, but never forget that history and that past.
Yeah. Does your mind go to, I mean, mine has, and I even wrote a piece about this, that when we were kind of, in that first year of the COVID pandemic, I was just like, yeah, this is not our first pandemic. And that one, that was 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, we, and we saw it again this past summer with monkeypox, and I am so very proud of how the gay community responded to monkeypox.
Yeah.
Okay.
We went from. And I think without a doubt, there were mistakes. Without a doubt, we need to make sure we have access. But what I saw was people changing their behavior.
Okay.
People, doing everything they could to get a vaccine because it was available.
Right.
They weren't, denying science. They weren't, they were like, get me this vaccine. And how do I get it?
Yeah.
And again, vaccine access was not the end all, and we still have a lot of work to do, and we're not, through the monkeypox by any means. However, we saw a very quick upshoot and a decline.
Right.
And I think, we learned some lessons. We as a community learned some lessons from HIV and responded, very quickly to the threat.
Right.
And so,
yeah, I was gonna get to monkeypox because I was, wondering how that's going, because it is still an ongoing situation.
Without a doubt.
But that is everything that I've heard. And I guess that's what I meant. Like, that was my frustration. Good God, if we would have had a vaccine, show up in 1987, we'd have all been in line.
Right, exactly. The line, but we're, we had a different respect for science.
We did.
We respected science in the 80s. We don't seem to respect science any longer. So, I think without a doubt. And that was one of the, and I know, you wanted to talk about PrEP, but it was one of the frustrations for me about PrEP was, here we have something, for years we were like, give us something to protect ourselves. And,
right.
And
so, yeah, because that's, we finally, knew that we had the cocktail that was working. We finally knew that, lives could be saved. Big turning point. Took some time, but big turning point just in terms of survival rate and all of that. And then the first thing, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the first thing that really came along that was pretty groundbreaking, was PrEP. Like, here we had this thing that you could take and not contract HIV.
Right. Yeah. And
seemed great.
One of my biggest frustrations was what I felt was the very slow rollout of PrEP, and the very slow acceptance of PrEP as not by the general public, but by our community.
Right. Right.
And PrEP was approved in the summer of 2012.
Wow. Okay, so we've had it for 10 years.
Yes.
Wow.
And as in 2014, I had the director of a very large LGBT health center, not in Philadelphia,
Okay.
say to me, well, because I spoke at an event and this person was at the event, and I was advocating for people to learn about PrEP and get on PrEP when, they handed me a microphone, because once you hand me a microphone,
Hey,
right.
Thanks.
And this person said, well, I think, PrEP is okay for, some people, but I don't think it's the magic bullet. And I said, I never said it was the magic bullet.
Right.
But
right.
It's not, it is something that is an option, and we need to make sure is available to people. And here we are 10 years later, and we're finally, we said, okay, insurance should pay for this.
Yeah.
But now, we'll see if that actually happens. And many insurance companies are doing it without being required to do it. But, the government has, kind of said this should be part of prevention. And now we got court cases kind of challenging that. So we'll see where all that goes. But, it is something that, again, isn't for everyone, but everybody needs to know about it, and everybody who it is appropriate for should have access to it.
Right. Right. It felt irresponsible to me, and a lot of it, and this was from AIDS activists. Felt like shaming. Felt like no, we're not gonna promote this because this is promoting, I don't know, irresponsible sexual activity, I guess.
Right.
Is that the argument?
And, unfortunately, all of HIV is tied up around sexuality and sex, and,
right.
Which, unfortunately then moves into morality issues that, for some people. And, I think that, we had very prominent figures in the HIV arena who, were calling it a party drug. PrEP was a party drug. And it's like, this is like the most irresponsible thing. And I, lost some respect for some people who were heroes.
Yeah.
Because of that stance. Most of them have all backtracked on that, but, it set us behind. And I think I've told you both about why, part of what, for me, why PrEP was, I jumped on the bandwagon very early. PrEP was approved in July of 2012.
Right.
In November of 2012, I was driving home from work and received a text message from a friend that a mutual friend of ours had died. And he was 44 years old. He had posted the night before on social media that he had the worst case of diarrhea he had ever had in his life, and he was going to bed. And when he didn't show up for work the next day, his coworkers called his emergency contact, who no longer had a key to his apartment. The police had to break down the door, and they found him dead. The autopsy came back that he had died as a result of HIV. I know he got tested regularly. I know that he was not HIV positive leading up to that. And, I have absolutely no doubt that the cause of his death was acute HIV infection, right. Where, the virus just ran rampant in his system. He got very sick. Some people have mild symptoms when they're first infected. Some people have more severe symptoms. I know people who have ended up in the hospital with acute infection right after becoming infected. And they get, I have one friend who got an HIV, ended up in the hospital. They did an HIV test because he was a gay man, and test came back negative. And he was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And the second week when they did the test came back positive. And he was in the hospital with acute HIV infection. Fortunately, his friends got him to the emergency room, and, he's doing really well, right? And in treatment and doing really well. But, this other friend never had that opportunity. And he died 6 months after PrEP was approved. And before most people had ever heard of it, right? Right. Certainly anybody outside of the HIV, kind of community, and there were large AIDS organizations who were lobbying against the approval of it. Right. It just makes, it made no sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like we have done a decent job just kind of across the board in destigmatizing PrEP. I mean, I at least within our community, maybe not still outside, but at least within, the queer community, I don't feel like it holds the stigma. People talk about being on PrEP, talking about,
I think we've done away with the slut shaming that was
right.
Early on with PrEP, and it was irresponsible for members of our community to be doing that, and they were, it was generally older, and I'm going to totally generalize here, but it was older gay men who were projecting that on young gay men, and it really wasn't fair to young gay men that they were doing that.
Right. Yeah. And, the person you're talking about, this is a profound example of someone who did test regularly, someone who did know their status, and someone who, would they have been on PrEP, he would still be with us. Like, that's a profound example. And
he believed very strongly in science. And he would have been on PrEP. He worked in a lab, and he would have been on PrEP had it been available to him.
Right. Yeah.
And he would still be with us today. And that for me is a failure.
I hear you. I feel like they were trying to say we don't want folks to get cavalier. I feel like it was a misguided way to look at it completely, and I think we realized that. But I feel like that was sort of their, we still have to be aware of HIV. We still have to know that it can be transmitted. We still have to understand all of these things. And are we going to forget all of that?
Right.
Does the data show we've forgotten all that, or are things?
I mean, our numbers are going down.
Right.
In the United States. Our numbers of new infections. We also, about the time of PrEP coming out was also when we finally acknowledged U equals U.
Yes.
That, undetectable equals untransmittable.
Right.
We also had in 2010, the first national AIDS strategy under the Obama administration. There was never a national strategy. Everything was done locally.
Right.
So you have you have PrEP, you have U equal, the acknowledgement that U equals U, and the emphasis, because U equals U, of really getting people into care, not just because it was the right thing morally to get people into care so they could live a long and healthy life, but from a public health standpoint, getting people into care meant that we could, possibly get a control on the number of new infections by getting people into care, getting them undetectable. And we've made strides in those areas. We're not where we need to be by any means, but we have made strides, and you're seeing the numbers go down. The number of new infections go down.
I feel like one of the more interesting and subversive things that you do, because I feel like the Philadelphia region, especially the bingo players, are more knowledgeable than maybe other parts of the country. And I think that that's because AIDS Fund has run gay bingo in Philadelphia for how many years now?
We just celebrated our 25th season. So,
wow.
25 years of gay bingo in Philadelphia.
Would you talk about what gay bingo is, please?
Sure. We're not the only ones who do gay bingo, certainly. So I'm going to talk about our gay bingo.
Yeah, yours. Yours is the one I've been to. Right.
Yeah. It is, it's bingo with a twist. And, we have our bingo verifying divas, or BVDs, who entertain the players.
And now these are the volunteer drag queens, right?
The volunteer drag queens, yes. I'm really, I always say we don't have any stars of gay bingo. The BVDs are the stars of gay bingo. It's an ensemble cast, and they range from, their early 20s into their 60s.
That's fair.
They're all there as volunteers. And every bingo has a theme, so they dress in theme for the bingo. And every one of them has their own, as drag queens will tend to do, has their own personality, their own shtick, their own thing. And we have a very diverse group of BVDs. But they open the show with an opening production number, and they also range in their abilities to dance. And it's all part
yes,
of
they do.
They verify the bingos. They call the games. They, interact with the audience, and just have a good time. Because, quite frankly, bingo's pretty boring otherwise.
I know.
It's like,
and I love that. I guess the host, Carlotta, right, gets up there and says, "This is not bingo at St. Monica's."
It is not. It is not. We're there to have a good time, but also, we have reached, as you said, thousands and thousands of people over the years, reminding them that HIV is an issue in our community, and part of our goal with bingo is, while we're there to raise money, we're there to have a good time, but we're also there to educate about HIV and keep people up to date as to where things are with the HIV epidemic. And that's part of my responsibilities. I always say I talk for the first 5 minutes of the event, and then I go sit down and do nothing for the rest of the event.
But I do, and that's why I said it's subversive in that so many people come in large groups. You have birthday parties and you've had engagements. You've had bachelorette parties. You had a wedding.
We had a couple who contacted us. We were doing always a bridesmaid, never a bride gay bingo.
Right.
And this couple reached out to us, heterosexual couple, who, yes.
They can't help it.
Yes. They said, we've been to bingo. We've been thinking about how we want to do this. We just, there was second marriage for both of them. They just wanted to invite a few of their friends and have a good time. And so they had a table of 18 or 20 people. Our bingo verifying divas served as the bridesmaids.
Of course.
We had other volunteers who wore tuxedo T-shirts who served as the ushers. And when we came back from intermission, we had a wedding and they got married at Gay Bingo. And
that's so
and of
cool.
course, all of their wedding gifts they asked to make as donations to AIDS Fund. So we've done whole lot of things over 25 years.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it really does put it just in a fun context, and it's so approachable. But I, as many as I've attended, you have never relinquished the opportunity to make it about education, to talk about where we are, to talk about U equals U, to talk about getting to zero. So, I feel like the thousands of people that have come through Gay Bingo take that knowledge forward.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, it is, I get their attention for a couple minutes to be able to talk about the seriousness of why we're there and to remind them and to acknowledge, the advances we've made, to make sure they know about PrEP and to make sure they know about U equals U. Because it is about, and most of our audience, most of our audience is a straight audience. They are, I'd love to say, they're there because of the cause. They're there because it's a fun event.
Yeah.
And it is that.
And so we get people at the event who maybe don't know about HIV or haven't kept up, because it's not in the news as much today.
Right.
And I'll get people who will come up to me afterwards and say, I have a young, my nephew is gay and, he just came out and you were talking about PrEP and where do I connect him to, or how do I talk to him about that? And that's important,
Yeah.
So.
And then grandma calls and says, listen, we have to talk about PrEP.
Right.
Yeah. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it happens. I mean, that, is really one of the things that I think, that side effect of we're raising money, we're having a good time, but that we're educating people and making sure that people know what's current and knows what's going on.
I love it. So correct me if anything that I am about to say, trying to set this up, correct me if I'm wrong, but, we went from that period of time where there was no funding. We went to there not being enough funding, to in the later 2000s, having more than one AIDS organization, case management out there, a lot of things happening, a lot more than we ever had. So I want to say it was 2016 when you looked across the landscape and, profoundly changed the direction of AIDS Fund. And, we were there to witness that. I was so proud of everyone involved. I thought it was amazing. I still do. Would you talk about that? The change
Sure.
and what the AIDS Fund does today.
Sure. And I think, just to kind of put it in perspective, I'll talk first about how AIDS Fund was founded.
Okay.
AIDS Fund was founded to produce the Philadelphia AIDS Walk.
Right.
And back in 1987, and was the first AIDS Walk in Philadelphia. And that was a point in time when there was no real federal funding or state funding or city funding. And there was a couple organizations in Philadelphia who were starting to do HIV, again, helping people to die with dignity more than anything, but also doing some street outreach and distributing condoms. It was Action Wellness, which was Action AIDS at that point, and Babashi, and Philadelphia Community Health Alternatives, which today is Mazzoni Center, they all started about that time, in the late 80s, and there was no funding, and so the AIDS Walk was founded to raise funds for these organizations, and so the AIDS Fund always was kind of an umbrella funding.
Right. Okay.
And we didn't do any direct services. We did public awareness campaigns and raise money through the walk to distribute to these organizations. Over the course of those 20 years, or 30 years, I guess, actually, from 1987 until 2016, things really changed. I mean, there was more government funding. There was organizations who, developed their own fundraising capacities. And what we found was, was AIDS Fund still relevant, in this new environment? And what if, because quite frankly, we were raising money for organizations who had budgets far larger than ours.
Right.
The money that we were giving them would, they'd end their year with income over expenses, which is not an issue with a nonprofit. They should be financially stable in doing that, but then more than what we were giving them. So how does this make sense in today's world? And so we really looked at where the need was today, and how do we keep people in care, and what could AIDS Fund's role in that be? And HIV in the U.S. is very much become a disease of poverty. The low income people are far higher risk of HIV than the general public. And that's across race, sexual orientation, everything.
Right.
Poverty is a driver of HIV. And what could our role be in addressing that? And we realized that the safety nets that are out there oftentimes aren't adequate. And so, the number one indicator of health outcomes is, do you have a roof over your head?
Right.
Okay. That's the number one indicator of successful health outcomes. And too many people living with HIV in the U.S. are homeless or housing insecure. And, we looked at what can we do? And so we changed our funding model entirely. So we no longer provide funding to organizations. We provide micro grants that are designed to keep people in care, that when their financial situation or a financial crisis could turn into a health crisis. So our average grant is just $400. 75% of the recipients live below the federal poverty level. In fact, the median, so half of the people who live below 75% of the federal population. So we're really talking about people who really don't have any access to resources. And about half the grants are to keep people in housing. So they're falling behind on their rent, or their utilities are about to be shut off. And of course, if your utilities are shut off and your landlord's going to evict you, right? You've got to keep the utilities on in order to keep your lease. So back rent and keeping utilities on are about half of what we do. Another 25% is helping people to obtain permanent housing. So they're housing insecure or they're homeless. And they finally got to the top of the list for a housing subsidy, but they don't have that chunk of money, that first and last month's rent and security deposit, to be able to get in. They'll be able to maintain themselves once they get in once they get those keys to the apartment. They should be able to maintain themselves.
Right.
But they don't have that chunk of money to get in there. And then the remaining 25% are other health needs that aren't being met. So things like, hearing aids, not covered. Identity documents. You can't get into the social service system if you don't have any ID. So if you're homeless and you've lost your birth certificate, license, all of those documents to prove who you are, $50 can get those documents for you so that you can those become the key to accessing anything else. A whole range of things. I'll give you an example of a young man who, because our dollars are private, we have a lot of flexibility that government dollars don't have.
Right.
So we are able to fund things that other people, there's no other source of funding out there. And so we had a young man who was HIV positive, contracted HIV when he was 15 or 16 in his home country as a result of abuse. He left his home country to come to the United States to escape abuse and to start a new life. He was connected with some social services and actually had gotten a hearing for asylum. So he had gotten an asylum hearing, was going before the judge, but he didn't speak English, and he needed an interpreter for this hearing. And there was no funding out there for that. And we were able to step in with a $250 grant to pay for the interpreter for this young man at his asylum hearing. And 2 weeks after his 18th birthday, he was granted asylum.
That's amazing.
Fabulous.
It's amazing what, a $250 grant can change somebody's life.
Yeah.
It could be life-changing. Get them off the street, can get them into care, can get them. We had a gentleman who was doing well, living in an apartment, was aging with HIV, and he had a stroke. And he left, of course, ended up in the hospital and then in rehab. And when he came home, he had lived for 10 or 12 years in a second floor walk-up apartment. When he left rehab, he had to be carried up the steps into his apartment. And then once he was in the apartment, he couldn't leave to go to any medical appointments, any rehab, physical therapy. he wasn't able to leave the apartment because he had to be carried in and out. And his medical case manager and his housing counselor were able to help him to locate a new apartment that was accessible, first floor, and had all wheelchair accessible, and so that he could recuperate. But again, he was living at poverty level when this happened. He didn't have $1,000 to put down on an apartment to move. This wasn't something that was planned. It wasn't something, but he needed to move, and we were able to give him a grant to get that first and last month's rent. So he was able to get into a new unit that was accessible for him, and he's doing well.
Fabulous.
But it's I'm not saying we're the only people doing this work in the country, but there's not enough programs like us. And we're really fortunate that we're able to do this, and people understand it and get it, and are supporting us and our efforts to help the most vulnerable people living with HIV.
Right, right, and it puts a tool in the toolbox of so many case managers whose hands were tied.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that has been so rewarding for us as an organization and working with the case managers, because all of our applications come through medical case managers, and when we first started, they were like, "Oh my God, I don't have to say tough luck to this
Right.
client. I can actually have a resource to help them." And the fact, again, because it's all private dollars, we have a lot of flexibility to say, no, it's not necessarily in our, mission definition that we're going to pay for an interpreter, because we didn't realize that situation would be out there.
Right.
But we're able to step in at the time and say, well, yeah, this is going to help this gentleman to get into care, stay in care, and have a long and healthy life with HIV, which is what we want for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved seeing it, kind of unfold at the time, that this was, here's a need not being met.
Right.
And it's not the same great big needs we had before, but it's just as critical to that person, to that individual human.
Right.
And, if you look at, the national strategy around HIV, that, the most recent one that came out, the emphasis on poverty and addressing these issues that become barrier to care, because we have the medications, right? We have the medications. We have the know-how. We just brought a new one of the large health systems here in Philadelphia that does their HIV clinic. And I was talking with the doctor who's the director of their HIV clinic, and they just, she was so excited because it took a long time for us to get our agreement through their legal process and everything, about 6 months. And they had just signed an agreement, and they were going to be able to start accessing the funds from us. And she called me on a Friday afternoon, so excited, that she said, and I said, well, how'd you finally get it through? And she's like, I finally just said to them, look, this is something that we can help our clients or patients with. I can help them medically.
Right.
But if they don't have a roof over their head, or they don't have the walker or the cane, there's only so much we can do medically. We have to address the entire person's situation if we're going to treat HIV. And, it was, for me, just really to hear a medical doctor, I believe very much in science, obviously, but I've come from a social science background, like that's, social services and, for the, a medical doctor to kind of, reiterate what we're saying all the time, was just really wonderful. And that she took the time to call me, because she was so excited was also, was a good feeling. We're doing something that's, like I said, we're not the only ones doing it, but it's unique. We're the only ones doing it in Philadelphia, specifically for people living with HIV. Right. It is really been rewarding, eye-opening, heartbreaking at times.
Sure.
But
sure.
So.
So that is the current work of the AIDS Fund.
Yeah.
A lot of the fundraising is done in Fundways. We talked about Gay Bingo. The AIDS Walk continues since 1987. Does that make this the 35th year?
Well, this will actually be the 36th.
Oh, wow.
Because you got to start counting with 81 or 87, right?
Okay.
So
All right.
you don't start on the 1 year anniversary. You start on the first one. So yeah, So this is our 36th.
Wow.
Yeah, I know this because I proofed the press release.
Right. Gotcha.
Otherwise, I, may not remember that.
And 2020, did it happen or it was virtual? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, of course it happened.
Right. Okay.
We always have said rain or shine, the walk was going to happen because, people with HIV needed the services or need the support, regardless of whether it rains or not. So we certainly weren't going to let COVID stop us.
That's right.
And so we did it virtually.
Right.
It was a bit of a challenge. We were fortunate in that, lockdown happened in March, the walkovers happens in October. So we had a little bit of, I felt bad for some of the events that were happening in like April and May of 2020, right? That didn't really have time to regroup and we were fortunate and we were able to do that. And we had, we put together a video of to kind of be our kickoff that we ran on social media and other outlets as a kickoff as to why we're doing it. And then we kind of, talked about, we always talk about getting to zero together, and we were still getting to zero together. We were just doing it from all over the place. And so it was really great. We had, people posting their walks in their neighborhoods. I did a wonderful hour and a half walk through the woods that day with two good friends. We still all did our fundraising and did our walk and shared in that, kind of the social media, which was kind of it was a great experience. I'm glad 2021 we were able to be back in person with some precautions in place. We're looking forward to being out at the Art Museum in 2 weeks for AIDS Walk Philly, the 36th annual.
36th annual AIDS Walk Philly at the Philadelphia Art Museum. 7:30 in the morning, things kind of get started?
Yes. Everything opens up at 7:30 in the morning. Right. We start our day. Our tradition is we always start the day with a reading of names of those we've lost to the epidemic. Mm. And we also have 25 blocks of the AIDS Memorial Quilt on display. And so that's how we start our day. We have at 8 o'clock, we, start with some opening remarks, why we're there. We have an aerobic warm up, and then at 8:30, we kick off the 5K walk. This year, again, we're it's, as I've said before, and I want to say again, it's important for us to remember those we've lost. Mm-hmm. We always start the day with reading names and with the 25 blocks of the AIDS Memorial Quilt. But it's also important to acknowledge where we've come. Yeah. And so this year, we are adding some things when people get back, some, just kind of some fun activities, kind of to flip that, we're going to have a little bit of fun when we get back. The Dukes of Destiny, who is a local band, kind of jazz influence band that has played since the very first AIDS Walk every year. They'll be playing, but we're going to add some fun and games into that mix also for a little bit when people get back to kind of, because we're not at the same spot. So nice. We want people to come back and celebrate, the funds that we've raised and the work that we're doing. So
nice. I wanted to mention the AIDS Fund is also the keeper of the Memorial Quilt in Philadelphia.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So yes, we do quilt displays throughout the year. Right. The last 2 years, not quite as many, but looking forward to getting back to that as things return to normal.
Yeah, I've been to some interesting ones. We did one in a library that wasn't opened yet. We took it to the Northeast. That was really something because the quilt had never been displayed up there. So that was a lot of fun. The synagogue, we've been there. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the places that I have helped set up stanchions. Right. Yeah, I know how they work.
The quilt is such a wonderful memorial. Yeah. Such a beautiful piece of art. And it's such a great educational tool, because I think you really see the richness and diversity of people who have been impacted by HIV when you look at the quilt. And, it remains the largest community folk art project in the world.
Yeah.
And, it's now the National AIDS Memorial is the keeper of the quilt, and so we're really pleased to be working with them to be able to bring the quilt to Philadelphia and display it throughout the region.
That's awesome. What do people need to know now? I've heard some interesting things, tidbits about maybe a vaccine for HIV. I don't know where that stands. What's the future looking like, right? From this point forward? Yeah,
I think we're HIV is a very I always say and I do I said I'm not a scientist. I do third grade science. So I talk to everybody about this stuff like they're in third grade because that's all I understand.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
But HIV is a either very smart or very stupid virus because it mutates so much. And I think, that's been the challenge in developing vaccines. I think we hear some, it'll get a little splash because, this patient in Berlin has been cured. And, but none of those things are really at this point on the horizon.
Okay.
They add to our knowledge base and our understanding, but the couple people who have been cured because they got complete blood bone marrow transfusions from somebody who has some natural immunity to HIV, right? And so, but that's not practical for the millions of people worldwide who are living with HIV.
Right.
But it does add to our knowledge base, right? So, that's the wonderful thing. Our knowledge base keeps growing. The advances in technology around vaccines continues to advance. So that's good news. But, I think our work is going to be needed for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I started this work in the early 90s thinking I was taking a quick little detour from higher ed administration. And it's become my life's work.
Yeah.
I'm probably, I don't know, I'm getting closer to retirement, and I don't believe that the work will be done before I'm ready to retire in 10 or 15 years.
Okay.
So I think we've got a ways to go. I hope I'm wrong, but I think we got a ways to go before we're going to see a vaccine. Just in that, it's a slow process, and HIV is pretty,
Right. Right.
It's a tough one.
To say the least, yeah.
Um,
What's the most important thing you want people to know, either about the work or about HIV? What's the message you hope gets across the most, personally?
I want people to understand that just because they don't hear about it anymore doesn't mean it's gone away. And just because there are people who are doing really well in treatment, not everybody has access to those treatments. Not everybody has the things that they need to be successful in those treatments. And I think we need to continue to address stigma.
Yeah.
It keeps stigma's the driver of the epidemic, and always has been. It keeps people from talking about HIV. It keeps people from acknowledging their risk to HIV or talking with their partners about HIV. And so, we need to continue to address stigma. As we, see all the time, even when we think, oh yeah, we've made progress, these things rear their ugly head when you're least expecting it, that to me is like the thing. I think that, one of the things that everybody can do is continuing to talk about HIV. I always say when I'm speaking at Gay Bingo, the one thing that everybody in that audience can do to combat HIV is that when they leave, they go out and they talk not just about having a good time at Gay Bingo, but the fact that HIV is still an issue. There's still work to be done. And that they maybe have taken one factor thing that they didn't know before, U equals U or PrEP or whatever, and share that information. Because that's how we address stigma. If we just stop talking about it, we can never address stigma.
Right. Right. And, I thank you for mentioning monkeypox, and that, the community had a really good response. And
not perfect. But,
not perfect.
Right.
Not perfect. But that made me afraid a little bit when the first things were coming out. It's like, here we go again. Right. Was kind of what sat in my stomach.
And easier to transmit than HIV.
Right.
When you look at of course there's already a vaccine. There's already so it's a matter of getting that rolled out, and that all of that takes time. But I saw, and I spend a lot of time socially with gay men during the summer, and that I saw the response around just awareness, getting the information, people kind of talking about it, when the vaccine started becoming available, people talking about, hey, did you this place is getting it, call here, and Great. Just really in that network of getting information, and accurate information, good information, and sharing it, and then, sharing the number where to get tested or where to get the vaccine or how to get on the list to get a vaccine, and all of that was really and behavior change. People being cautious and being alert and understanding what was risky and what wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in a very quick, again, we started talking about monkeypox in May.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In May, and we saw, really a response, and the numbers are going, down. We never saw that with HIV. The numbers just always ended up until recently, where they plateaued then and now started coming down. But, we were at a plateau for a long time with HIV,
Right.
So.
Good. That's heartening.
Right. Yeah.
That's heartening.
Well, I don't always give our community a lot of credit, but
neither do we. Neither do we. But credit where credit's due.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rob, I want to thank you so much. I know this is a busy time of year for AIDS Fund. We will see you on October the 16th. I don't know why he always tells me 7:00 in the morning. It says on the well, anyway. We'll see you by 7, Rob.
If we want to learn more about AIDS Fund, where can we go?
AIDSFundPhilly.org. That's AIDSFund, F-U-N-D, Philly, PHILLY.org.
Okay. And we can learn about gay bingo and the AIDS walk and all of that on that same website.
Yep.
Okay.
Right there.
We'll make sure to have that in the notes to this episode.
We will.
Great.
We will. And thank you for joining us. I think that this was a terrific time to catch up, because we haven't had a chance to catch up with you for a long time.
For a very long time.
Been a while.
So, thank you for your generosity with your time. And
my pleasure. Thank you.
We will see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Full Circle is a Never Scared Productions podcast, hosted by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal, produced and edited by Never Scared. Executive produced by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal. Our theme and music is by the Jingleberries. All names, pictures, audio, and video clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.